Well, welcome back to another edition of 42nd Street Pete's Grindhouse as we march into March. I guess depending on where you live, it hasn't been a winter here, let's put it that way. It's like today, it's February, whatever, I don't know whatever the hell it is, but it's like 60 degrees. So we're marching into March and it's warm. But as we march into March, I have to put a friend of mine's show over. That's what I do. Promote my friends, and Horror Realm is coming up first weekend in March. March 3rd, 4th, and 5th to be exact. And they've got quite a lineup of guests. They have, I guess he's the hottest ticket in horror right now, Art the Clown. David Thornton will be there, I believe, in full Art the Clown regalia. Also, WWE Hall of Famer and TNA Hall of Famer, and she also passed through WSU. Gail Kim, one of the world's greatest female wrestlers, will be at the show. I believe only on Saturday, though. Who else do we got? We have, I gotta roll this up because I can't fucking see. One of the original Scream Queens, Linnea Quigley, will be there. Of course, Linnea has just been in this other film that's making the rounds on the indie circuit, Thrust, and I'm sure they'll have copies of that there too. And we have Jason himself, or at least one of the Jasons, C.J. Graham. Who else we got here? Tom McLaughlin, Tony Moran, V. Neal. Bunch of people you've heard of. Tony Moran was Michael Myers, I believe. Let's see, I gotta scroll this up because I'm fucking blind here. Damien Leone, Amelia Kinkadale, Tom Matthews, of course, from Return of the Living Dead, R.A. Mikhailov, who was Leatherface in Texas Chainsaw 3, Tom Fridley, Jennifer Barco, Brittany Marbell, and probably some local talent there. I believe Toe Tag Pictures will be there, and maybe Art from Ultraviolent, and I don't think there's anybody else in Pittsburgh that's going to be there worth mentioning. But anyway, it's Horror Realm. Go to horrorrealm.com on the net. You can get your advance tickets and the photo op stuff and all that information there about who's charging what and to whom. And it's going to be on the 3rd, 4th, and 5th of first weekend in March. And again, it's definitely a cool little show. It's in around Pittsburgh, and friends of mine run it, and it's fan convention run by fans who really care about the genre. So if you're in the area that weekend, feel free to check it out. So anyway, we've gone back to some westerns. 1968's The Scalp Hunters, to be exact. This is an interesting film because Burt was one of those guys that didn't give up the ghost. He just kept on going, and Burt had this really lackadaisical way of delivering lines and stuff like that. I've never seen Burt really get riled in any of these westerns. He just sort of like deadpans deliver this. Well, in this one, he's Joe Bass, a fur trapper, who unfortunately is intercepted on his way to sell the furs by a band of the Kiowa, who decide they're going to trade this slave they just captured, Joseph Lee, played by Ossie Davis, for Joe's furs. Well, of course, Joe doesn't want to trade, but he's outnumbered. And Joseph Lee's an educated slave. He claims he was living with the Comanche, so he's a black Comanche. So that is a back and forth thing between Joe Bass and Joseph Lee through the whole thing. Interestingly enough, Burt Lancaster met Ossie Davis during a civil rights march with Martin Luther King, I believe, back in '64. And Burt was the one who basically got him this role. It was directed by Sidney Pollack and also starred Telly Savalas, Shelley Winters, and Dabney Coleman. So, bunch of stuff going on. Basically, Joe Bass is going after the Kiowas, who are intercepted by the Scalp Hunters, a bunch of nasty people who basically scalp the Indians and sell their scalps for $25 a piece to Mexico. This actually is real. There was such a practice back then, selling Indian scalps, and when they ran out of Indian scalps, they weren't loath of killing Mexican peons and using their scalps too. Rotten period of fucking history, but nevertheless true. Anyway, there's a bit of back and forth between Joe Bass and Joseph Lee. One of the lines that Joe Bass spouts is, you know what your problem is, Joseph Lee? You read too many books. Burt Lancaster delivers these lines like crazy. Also in the group of Scalp Hunters is Bert's former acrobatic partner, Nick Cravat, who was in 9 films with Bert, and he's Yancey in this one and doesn't speak a lot. Matter of fact, Nick didn't speak in most of the films he was in because he had a heavy, thick Brooklyn accent. And even though he was a small guy, he was strong as a bull, and they said, do not piss him off because it takes several men to hold him back from kicking the crap out of you. Also, a little interesting trivia note, Nick played the gremlin in the Twilight episode of Nightmare, whatever it was, 3,000 Feet with William Shatner. He was the gremlin standing on the wing of the plane. But back to Scalp Hunters. Unfortunately, like I said, the Kiowa gets wiped out, and Joe Bass is now going to take the furs away from the Scalp Hunters. But Joseph Lee foolishly allows himself to get captured, and they're going to sell him in Galveston for $1,500. He sort of like ingratiates himself with Shelley Winters, who's Telly Savalas' main squeeze. And there's a lot of interplay back there, back and forth. Of course, Joe Bass is not going to give up going for his furs, and basically kills about 4 of the gang before they're trying to make a deal where basically Joseph Lee says he'll leave you alone if you just give him the furs back. So they send Joseph Lee to palaver with him and bring a bottle of whiskey, and of course there's another back and forth there. It sort of mirrors the racial things that were going on in that time period because a lot of it, actually was happening. Whether, a white man can accept a black man as an equal, that type of shit. So anyway, it's all good there because what happens is they decide to leave the furs there, but there's a trap laid with Telly Savalas buried himself alive and pops up and knocks Joe out and then expects Joseph Lee to help him. Well, Joseph Lee's being egged on by Joe Bass to take out Telly Savalas, who was Jim Howie or something like that. During a fight, a gun goes off and Telly Savalas' character is killed, leaving Joseph Lee to decide he can go to Mexico by himself with Joe Bass's horse and with the furs. Except the horse is trained to stop at a certain whistle, which throws Joseph Lee into the dirt. And of course, Joseph Lee turns the tables on Burt Lancaster by doing the same thing to the horse and have him thrown in dirt. So the two of them start a fist fight, and they're basically beating the shit out of each other in this big muddy creek, submerged creek rather, while the Kiowas have reunited and basically have rode in and are wiping out the Scalp Hunters. They're all standing there laughing at the fight between Joseph Lee and Joe Bass. And Joe Bass tells Two Crows he's glad to see him and he wants his furs, but Two Crows pointed out that he did trade the furs for Joseph Lee, and they take off with Shelley Winters and the other women in tow because Shelley goes, well, a man's a man, and hands him the liquor. Well, Joseph Lee and Joe Bass are sitting there with one horse when Joseph Lee says, there's 2 cases of whiskey in that wagon, and I'll bet those Indians will be drunker than hell by nightfall. Which leads basically the 2 men covered with mud to get on the one horse and set out in search of the furs. And that was the end of the film. Like I say, a lot of this is played for comedy, but a lot of it has some heavy-duty social commentary in there. And like I said, at the end, the 2 men are working together and now right off for a common goal. Bert, of course, was another champion of civil rights. And Bert was one of those guys who kept himself solvent in the late 60s and early 70s where he did a lot of Westerns. And we'll get into that at a future episode, but some of the stuff he did was Lawman, Valdez is Coming, and Yolanda's Raid, which are all pretty heavy-duty action flicks, and of course they would be classified as grindhouse Westerns. So we'll get to some more of them down the road, but like I said, if you're in the Pittsburgh area, check out Horror Realm. It's a really good show, some cool vendors and stuff like that, and some cool guests, so definitely worth attending. So that's all I got today. Thanks for subscribing. Welcome all the new subscribers to The Insanity. And above all, you guys stay safe, and we'll catch you on the flip side.